Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Weird News and Wacky History, a look behind the scenes throughout the years. I'm your host, Pastor Roland Moss. With the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, there were many stories of tragedy, but here are some stories of those who survived. Let's take a look together at Surviving the Sinking. 38-year-old Charles Lightoller, HMS Titanic's second officer, will be forever linked to the tragic events of April 14, 1912. But his finest hours were still to come. Awarded the Distinguished Service Cross when the torpedo boat he commanded attacked a German Zeppelin during World War I, he served another 20 years post-war with the White Star Line before retiring. Then in July of 1939, he and his wife surveyed the German coastline disguised as vacationing elderly tourists. In May of 1940, the Admiralty requisitioned his 58-foot steam launch, the Sundowner, to help evacuate the 400,000 Allied troops stranded in France at Dunkirk. Lightoller agreed, but only if he piloted her. So on June 1st, 1940, 66-year-old Lightoller, his eldest son Roger, and 18-year-old Sea Scout Gerald Ashcroft sailed to the rescue. Cramming 130 men from a bombed-out destroyer into a craft designed to hold 21, Lightoller sailed for home. In the middle of the English Channel, German dive bombers started stalking him, but his years of canny seamanship served him well. He threw the Sundowner first hard a port and then hard a starboard to avoid the falling bombs, delivered his rescued men safe and sound. Lightoller died in 1952 at age 78, a hero to the end. Another crew member proved to be remarkably fortunate as well. The White Star Fleet was the creme de la creme of sailing ships of the early 20th century, with their trio of ocean liners, the Olympic, Titanic, and the Britannic. And Violent Constance Jessup secured a position in 1911 on the Olympic as a stewardess. Then on September 20th, the Olympic collided with a British warship. The ship limped back to port severely damaged, but with all hands intact. Undeterred, Violet transferred to sister ship Titanic on April 10, 1912. 4 days later, the White Star liner sideswiped an iceberg and sank. Argentinian-born Violet helped non-English-speaking passengers before being ordered into Lifeboat 16. By now, many folks wouldn't be leaving dry ground again, but not Violet. During World War I, the third sister ship, Britannic, was pressed into service as a hospital vessel, and there was Violet, this time serving as a Red Cross stewardess. On the morning of November 21, 1916, an unexplained explosion rocked the ship, and Violet again felt the deck tipping beneath her feet. This time she had to leap for her life, suffering a traumatic head injury as the ship sank into the Aegean Sea. Amazingly, she continued to work for White Star as well as several other shipping lines. She died at 83, thrice saved and safely ashore in 1971. Sometimes the unlikeliest people prove the most heroic. Crisis often reveals a person's true character. Arguably none shone brighter on the night of April 14, 1912 than did Charles Yongen, the RMS Titanic's head baker. This seasoned sailor quickly realized the seriousness of the situation. Rushing to his kitchen, he sent teammates topside with bread to feed the folks abandoning ship. After a quick drink, he hurried to his own muster station, but instead of climbing aboard, he found women and children below decks and herded them into lifeboats instead. Having done all he could, he headed to his cabin for another quick nip, then went topside again. This time he grabbed every deck chair he could find and flung them overboard to those already in the water. A quick return below decks, this time for a drink of water, was interrupted by the rending shock of the ship breaking in half. Climbing up to the very stern, he tightened his lifeboat and rowed the wreck down. And survived! Reinforced by alcohol, the strong swimmer stayed alive in the 28-degree water for over 2 hours before being pulled into a lifeboat. Except for swollen feet, the rugged Yongen survived unscathed. He'd die at 78 in 1956, a Titanic hero to the very end. Some even survived the sinking by completely missing the sailing of the Titanic. Milt and Catherine were seasoned travelers. From their marriage in 1895 until Kitty's untimely death in 1915, Milt and Kitty visited the far corners of the globe. After conquering the U.S., off they went to the Middle East, Africa, and all over Europe. Museums, pyramids, castles, resorts of all type, they did them all and then some. As Kitty's health began to deteriorate, they spent winters in the south of France, with Milt sailing home as needed to attend to his flourishing business interests. It was challenging, especially when an urgent matter back home demanded his immediate presence in the spring of 1912. Milt had already booked passage on a luxurious new liner back on December 18th, writing on a hefty $300 check as a deposit. But this time every hour mattered, so Milt left Kitty with friends and sailed by himself aboard the German SS America, on April the 7th instead of the RMS Titanic on April the 10th. Milton Kitty's near miss made front page news in Pennsylvania newspapers. Kitty would write to her mom, "Just heard of sinking of the big steamer. How thankful I am God directs to safety in our travels." And so a crisis in his vast candy kingdom saved the lives of Milton and Catherine Hershey. And that's about all the time we have for this edition of Weird News and Wacky History, a look behind the scenes of what's been happening throughout history. I'm your host, Pastor Roland Moss, wishing that all your history may be just a little bit weird.